moving from a sedentary to a physically active societal way of life. This is Up on Our Feet.
Welcome to Up on Our Feet. We're going to take you back some 300,000 years in humanity's evolutionary history, but we're going to do this in the present moment today. How so? Well, there's a people, a culture, a tribe of the human species, Homo sapiens, that is hunting and gathering for their subsistence on the earth today, just as our species did 300,000 years ago. And there are a number of significant things we can learn about our current human condition from these people living today, just as human beings did back then. So who are these people? Where are these people? And why has our guest taken many trips over the years to conduct extensive research about these people and how they live their lives? Professor Herman Pontzer is an evolutionary anthropologist at Duke University, and he has a book out entitled Burn, New Research Blows the Lid Off How We Really Burn Calories, Stay Healthy, and Lose Weight. This fascinating book uses the backdrop of Professor Pontzer's time with these people to bring into perspective physical activity, how our bodies use energy, and how this is all related to the current human condition and how we live our lives. Professor Pontzer, it's nice to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's begin by asking, we did this in the intro, who are these people? Where are these people? And why have you made so many trips to study them, their culture, and how they live their lives?
Sure. So I'm an evolutionary anthropologist, like you mentioned. And so I'm very interested in how, our species evolved and how our evolutionary past shapes the way our bodies work today. Things like health and nutritional needs and all those elements that our bodies need. Understanding them from an evolutionary perspective, I think, is really important. Now, if we want to understand how the human body works, it can be really important to understand how the human body works in a hunting and gathering context. Why is that? Well, because humans have been hunting and gathering for hundreds of thousands of years. In fact, we come from a hunting and gathering group, the genus Homo, that was hunting and gathering for 2.5 million years, even before our species showed up. And so we come from hunting and gathering stock, right? And just like we would want to understand any species in its sort of ecologically relevant context, right? We wouldn't study a species in a zoo if we didn't have to, right? We'd study a species in the kinds of environments where it evolved. It can be really helpful to understand humans in a hunting and gathering context. Now, all humans alive today are all equally modern and all physiologically modern, and so we're all Homo sapiens today. We're all modern today, but there are a handful of cultures that have held on to hunting and gathering as a way of living, a way of making a living, and so those handful of cultures that are still doing that are sort of great ways to ask the question, how would anybody's body look and act, and what would its physiology be and health be in a hunting and gathering context? Because there are some cultures that are still doing it.
Okay, so what is the culture that you started and where are they?
One of these cultures that is still living as a hunter-gatherer community today, Hadza. And so the Hadza are in northern Tanzania. They have any domesticated animals or crops or electricity or plumbing or anything like that, no vehicles or guns or anything like that. Instead, they live in the savanna of northern Tanzania, sort of dry savanna, acacia and baobab trees, think zebras and giraffe and that kind of ecosystem. And they hunt and gather for their food. So men hunt wild game with bow and arrow that they make themselves. Men also will climb up into trees to chop into the tree limbs to get into the bees' nests to get wild honey. It's a big part of their diet. Women gather plant foods that are wild, growing around where they live. So they often will pick berries, or they'll dig tubers, wild root vegetables. And so that's how they get their food every day, is from the wild landscape around them. No farming, nothing like that. It's all wild foods that they get every day.
Okay, so from a general perspective, and also more specifically, you've made many trips there. Just what have you learned from all your research in studying the Hadza people and their lifestyle?
Yeah, so a lot of my work focuses on how our bodies burn energy, right? How we burn calories every day. And I'm interested in that because energy expenditure is sort of at the interface of our bodies and our environments, right? Everything we do requires calories, requires energy that we burn. And we get that energy from the food that we eat from our environment. So humans are that interface between ourselves and the environment is really kind of mediated by the energy we burn. There were lots of measurements of energy expenditure in populations like here in the US and in Europe and other industrialized populations when I started my work about 15 years ago. But there were no measurements of total energy burned, the calories burned every day in a hunting and gathering community, right? And so as an anthropologist, as an evolutionary anthropologist specifically, wanting to understand how our bodies function in hunting and gathering contexts and communities, well, that seemed like a big sort of missing piece of the puzzle that we really wanted to go out and understand. So with collaborators of mine and good friends, Dave Reichland and Brian Wood, we organized and got funding to go into Tanzania and work with the Hadza community to measure all the energy they burn every day using this technique that we use in modern nutritional studies here in the US. And yeah, we expected, of course, right, that they would burn tons of calories every day because it's a really physically active lifestyle. They get more activity in a day than most Americans get in a week. And so we expected that they would have really high energy because they're so physically active.
Okay. And so one of the things in your book, Burn, you said that really caught my attention is that, and this is something I think that came out of your research, not only with the Hadza, but that you've been doing at Duke, is that contrary to prevailing thought, exercise really isn't a very efficient way to lose weight. Why is this?
Yeah, so we go to the Hadza, we get all this, get everything organized to go there and measure energy expenditures there. And like I said, the whole reason we went was we thought that they would be burning lots more energy than we do every day here in the West. We want to understand what that gap was, right? Because one of the ideas that we have about obesity in the developed countries is this idea that you see a lot that well, in industrialized lifestyles, modern life, we aren't burning as many calories because we're not as physically active. And so those unburned calories kind of add up over time as fat. We wanted to go test that idea and see just what the gap was, how many more calories they're burning in a Hadza community than we are here in the West. So we went there, we spent months in these early trips, living in Hadza camps, working with men and women in these communities who were wonderful, by the way, and great, really gracious sort of hosts for us as we were living there. And when we did these measurements, we were shocked that actually they're burning the same number of calories as we are in the West, right? There's no difference. In fact, they tend to be a bit shorter, as sort of smaller body weight. And so they're actually burning even fewer calories than we typically do in the West. But once you account for body size, because bigger people tend to burn more calories, it all evens out. And so you can't distinguish, right, between energy expenditures, men and women in the US, Europe, and industrialized countries. That was a huge shock, right? So they are getting 5 to 10 times more physical activity every day, but they're burning the same number of calories. And that was a real eye-opener for us. And it suggested that lifestyle doesn't change how many calories we burn the way that we think it does, the way we're usually told that it does. Instead, our bodies adjust and kind of keep energy expenditure more or less in a sort of a narrow range that we all share. And the implication of that is that changing physical activity in your life is not going to be a great way to increase energy expenditure and lose weight. It's going to be important for health. Exercise is really important for your health, but it's not going to be a great tool for weight loss because it's not going to push your calorie expenditure around the way we're often told that it will.
Okay. So in this context, you wrote a 2019 Scientific American article And let me quote you here. You said, our bodies are evolved to require daily physical activity, and consequently, exercise does not make our bodies work more so much as it makes them work better. What do you mean by this?
Yeah, that's right. So, thinking back again to the odds of work, and by the way, we've gone and found the same result in other communities. We can see the same result happening within the US population, for example. We can look at more active people and less active people, and they don't have differences in energy expenditure the way we think they do. If the differences are small, if they're there at all. All of that suggests that as we add exercise to our life, increase physical activity, which we should, pretty much all of us should be doing, right? Very few of us are getting enough physical activity every day. When we do that, we're not going to change the calories that we're burning. We're not going to change the work that our body does in terms of calories spent per day. Instead, we're going to spend our calories differently, right? After our bodies kind of adjust to our new, more active lifestyle, which is good for you, you should do it. But after your body adjusts to that new active lifestyle, you'll be spending more energy on activity, of course, on exercise. But your body will spend less energy on other stuff like inflammation, stress-free activity, that kind of thing. We're working out exactly what those adjustments are. But those adjustments seem really important and really powerful in terms of our health and keeping us healthy with exercise. But it doesn't change the calories spent per day as much as it does how we spend those calories.
Okay. And when speaking of how we spend those calories, how do they get spent and what do they do?
Right. So, this is a great question because we think about energy expenditure, or we read about it in, the glossy magazine you get at the newsstand kind of thing, or you read about it on diet websites. People always talk about energy expenditure in terms of just exercise, right? And the food that you eat. And those are the only ways that we talk about energy expenditure. Energy expenditure is everything that does, right? So everything that your body does, you've got 37 trillion cells. Each one of them is a microscopic factory, bringing nutrients in, breaking them up, making new products, sending other signals out to every cell in your body, every one of the 37 trillion cells is incredibly active. So all of that work takes energy that we get from our diet. But what that means is that a very small portion of the total calories that you burn every day are spent on exercise. Even a really physically active person actually will burn more of their calories, the majority of their calories, on other stuff. So for example, your brain, right? Your brain burns 300 kilocalories a day. That's the equivalent of running a 5K, right? So your brain is running a 5K every day inside your head. Your immune system, right? We're all very aware of our immune these days in this pandemic that we're all working our way through. Your immune system, even when you're not sick, right, or don't feel sick, it's still dealing with bacteria, viruses, that kind of stuff that are all trying to get in and cause trouble. Reproductive systems, right? Stress reactivity, all these, and just the housekeeping, right? The cells have to keep themselves alive. They have to keep bringing nutrients in. So all that takes a lot of energy. And so small adjustments in those other things, what's making room for more energy spent on exercise as we increase our activity in our life. Those adjustments are really good, by the way. We know that I should say that we're working out exactly what those adjustments are and how exactly how that works at the cellular level. But what we know already is that when we look at people who exercise a lot and people who don't, people who exercise regularly have less inflammation. Well, what is inflammation? Inflammation is your immune system being overactive, right? So you're kind of calming your immune down, basically. You're making it spend less energy on this stuff called inflammation, which you shouldn't be doing anyway. Stress reactivity, right? Your heart rate goes up and your stress reaction happens every time you have a stressful encounter on the street. Several times a day, you're kind of getting alerted to stresses in your environment that you see. People who exercise more have a dampened stress response, right? They don't have as big of a response, and it kind of comes back to baseline more quickly. So it helps your stress levels if you exercise more. reproductive hormone levels, right? In the West, in the US and Europe and other industrialized countries, the testosterone and estrogen levels that we think of as normal are actually really high compared to what we see when we look at like farming communities and other traditional groups that are kind of more like what we think an active lifestyle should look like in terms of the way our bodies work. Bringing our reproductive hormones down just a little bit, not to an unhealthy level at all, but just from these sky high levels that we often have, is probably, we see that when people exercise. And we think this is one of the reasons exercise is so good at preventing, helping to prevent reproductive cancers. So men who exercise are less risk of prostate cancer. Women who exercise are at less risk of breast cancer, for example. So all these adjustments your body makes when you exercise, when you're more physically active, are important for our health.
Okay, so is this then what's related to, I talked about the 2019 Scientific American article. The title of the article is "Exercise is not optional, it is essential." Is that what you're talking about here?
That's right. All those adjustments would keep us healthy. Exercise gets everywhere and affects every organ in our body. It affects how our brains work. It affects our mood, right? It affects every aspect of our health. So exercise is absolutely essential if we want to optimize our health. And it's not, throughout our evolutionary history, it wouldn't have been an option, right? It would have been just part of our daily lives. Our bodies are still running the same way, right? We haven't changed the way our bodies work. It still needs to be this sort of essential part of our everyday lives. But the changes that now, right, in our industrialized world that we all live in, we have to make the choice, the conscious choice to exercise. Whereas before it was just part of the fabric of daily life. Now we have to actually go and make time for it. But it's just as essential as it was before. The question is now, are we going to choose to do it, even to do this important thing for our health?
Right. So in this context, and given your research, it appears that you're saying that human beings have evolved to be physically active and not sedentary.
Yeah.
And then looking at our evolutionary history and how the human genome has been created over millions of years, what do the current rates of overweight and obesity, metabolic, chronic, and cognitive disorders here in the US and Western cultures in general tell us about how we're living our lives, especially when you compare and contrast this with your research with the Hadza?
Yeah, well, we're doing a lot of things right in the industrialized world. So let's start there. Sanitation and indoor plumbing and vaccines, these are all really good things that are helping us stay healthier. So I wouldn't trade our current lifestyle for a hunting and gathering lifestyle. As much as I love to go and live with the Hadza, I like it here for all those reasons. But we have to be really careful because, as you mentioned, the rates of obesity, the rates of heart disease, the rates of all these non-communicable diseases, what some people call diseases of civilization, diseases of modernization, are becoming the leading causes of death worldwide. Heart disease is the leading killer worldwide, not just in rich countries anymore, but everywhere. It's the leading cause of death. And when we look at a community like the Hadza, they don't have heart disease, right? And they're not alone. Other traditional hunting and gathering farming populations today, they've got the same body. We're all humans, we're all people, but they don't get heart disease, and they don't get type 2 diabetes, and they don't have issues with their weight. And it's a lifestyle difference, right? So we've made some really good decisions with how we've engineered our worlds, but we've also made some decisions about our food environments, the way we've kind of engineered physical activity out of our lives, that they feel good in the moment, right? It feels good to take the escalator, not the stairs. But it's not actually long-term doing us any favors. And so we need to figure out a way to engineer those activity levels back into our lives. And we should focus on diet too, by the way. We haven't talked about diet yet, but that's another big piece of this, right? Modern ultra-processed diets are another part of the problem. But I think we can do it if we, about how we engineer these things and learn from these cultures that are already doing it really well.
Okay. Then if you would, can you say a few words about diet?
Sure. So, there's the diet wars, as some people know them, is the sort of vitriol about you'll find on social media, pretty much anywhere you look, about how to lose weight and what the best diets are. And some people are propose low carb, and some people want plant-based, and people are arguing about what the evil foods are and what the best foods are. It could be a lot simpler than that, I would argue. The reason that our modern diets, our modern food environments cause so much obesity is that they are full of ultra-processed foods that our evolved brains are not evolved to encounter, right? So the reward systems in your brain that light up every time you get a bit of salt and sugar and fat, all those nutrients that have been hard to come by evolutionarily, we're wired to seek them out, to enjoy them. And now, of course, we can get them in whenever we want. And not only foods that are, ultra processed foods that are engineered to be, mass produced and mass consumed, people intentionally flavor them so that they light up those reward systems. So it's an even bigger problem. All of the genes that have been identified to date that associate with obesity. So if you have this variant of the gene or that variant of the gene, you're more or less likely to become obese. There are hundreds of these genes out, tiny little effects that push you one way or the other. All those genes are active in your brain, right? They're not active in your fat tissue. They're not active in your gut. They're active in your brain because it's this reward system signaling that really kind of tends to push us towards overconsuming. And so we have to be cognizant of that. And if we can be more careful about how our food environments are built so that we're not surrounded by all these irresistible ultra processed, I think we'd be better off. Especially, it's that at the macro level, I think about changing supermarkets, but, our kids getting school cafeterias, right? We could start there and try to address childhood obesity with the food that we serve our kids. And in our own homes, we can try to keep that junk out of our cupboards and out of our fridge and try to shape our own personal food environments in ways that are healthier as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then looking at physical activity and exercise, looking at diet, in a sense, are the metabolic, chronic, and cognitive disorders really not problems in and of themselves, but rather symptoms of a problem?
I think that's right. I think we can think about it that way, and that's helpful. The way that we have industrialized our lives, it has huge consequences for physical activity, for diet. For that matter, we haven't talked about this, and that's not my expertise, but it's clear that the way we interact socially is also different, right? If you grow up in a Hadza community, you are surrounded your whole life by friends and family that you'll know your whole life. You'll have those deep connections, and you'll see them every day. You'll be outside every day, right? Getting fresh air. And we have taken a lot of that away from ourselves in the sort of industrialized world. And so a lot of these diseases of civilization, as they're called, I think you're right. I think they are kind of symptoms of this move away from these elements of traditional lifestyles that remain so important for health, but we kind of lose them one by one without noticing because the short-term effect feels good, and we kind of lose track of the long-term effects. So again, I wouldn't trade where I live. I love it here in the States, but I think we can borrow and learn from these other cultures. I think that's why it's so important to do this kind of cross-cultural work, because we're not, we might not find the solution in our own backyard. We might have to kind of go further afield and try to draw on these other cultures and try to understand it so well so that we can bring that back home.
Yeah, okay. Just a moment ago, you mentioned the cafeteria food that the kids get at the schools and how it may not be the best for their health and how their brain works. Also then related to kids and their education, schools throughout America and all around the world use a mostly, if not fully, sedentary manner to educate school children. Throughout most of the school day, the kids are sitting at a desk. Does this basically sedentary method of learning and the diet that the kids are consuming, in a sense, contradict how we've been genetically programmed over millions of years? And then it not only compromises the kids' health, but their academic performance regarding how physical activity and diet positively impact cognition in the brain.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we could do a whole lot better with the way that we organize our school day for our kids. And some schools are doing this already. The ones that are kind of paying attention and thinking progressively about this, I think are doing a better job getting kids on their feet, making sure that you're not sitting for 45 minutes, making sure you're at least taking active breaks. My parents are both school teachers, so I'm very sympathetic to how hard it is to get 30 kids to sit, or 20 kids to sit down and learn anything. I've got 2 little kids myself too. So, I'm not, teachers have it hard enough. I know how hard that job can be. But, I think the more that we can engineer and kind of design movement into the day, I think it helps. So I'd like to see more of that, and I'm always really tickled when I find out that my school, my kids' school has been doing that in clever ways. I think all it good and more of that, and let's try to make that be the norm.
Okay. Circling back to the Hadza people, regarding their lifestyle of continuous physical activity and all its benefits from having their bodies work better, their brains functioning better, some viewers might be asking, okay, that's nice for them, but do we have to wear loincloths and learn how to throw spears to enjoy the same low, if non-existent rates of metabolic, chronic, and cognitive diseases?
No, I think that's right. And you don't, is the short answer. And a lot of the paleo lifestyle stuff you see, especially that, go on the internet, you can find anything taken to its logical extreme, right? You see these kind of paleo play acting as a way of life and a way to try to recapture those elements of health. I don't think you have to do that at all. A great example of bringing the kinds of things we learn from these cultures into our own lives. If you look at people who are already getting the same amount of physical activity every day than women do, because maybe great examples of this are people who are like postal workers who are walking their route. And so they get 1,000 steps a day, pretty routinely. That, by the way, would put you about in the middle of the range for Hadza men and women who get about 13,000 to 19,000 steps a day. People who are that physically active every day, guess what? They don't get heart disease, right? They don't get other non-communicable diseases the way that the rest of us seem to. So we can, again, if we're smart about how we do it, we can bring these elements home, make them ours, right? Make it make sense in our day-to-day lives. And we don't have to go back, to hunting and gathering or change things up dramatically. Right, that's right. We don't have to do that to learn from these people.
Okay, final question. With all the research you've done with the Hadza and all the other research you've conducted and papers you've authored and co-authored, in the big picture of things, what's the big message, the big takeaway, the major conclusion you've come to from all your work?
We have been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, as physically active social people. When we take those elements away from ourselves, we take the physical activity away from ourselves, we take social connections that we are kind of built to rely on away from ourselves, bad things happen, right? Our bodies don't do well, our minds don't do well. And so the more that we can kind of keep those core elements in our daily lives, the better we'll be. So that's what I've tried to take from my research and my time with the Hadza, and I hope other people will take that as well.
Okay. The book is Burn, New Research Blows the Lid Off How We Really Burn Calories, Stay Healthy, and Lose Weight. Professor Herman Pontzer of Duke University, thanks for being with us on Up on Our Feet.
Thank you for me.